Welcome back to Switzer. The key to success with many businesses is an ability to make a sale. But there are many common mistakes in companies and salespeople make that can easily be avoided. Here to tell us more is sales and marketing specialist John Lees, who's the author of 11 books and the former marketing and sales director of Schwarzkopf Australia and New Zealand. Welcome, John. How are you, mate?
Hi, how are you?
Great. Now, we're talking about sales and the mistakes that people make in sales. And it's not just the professional salespeople. There are people who have small businesses. They're clearly in sales.
Yeah.
So what mistakes are people making?
May I start with a story? And the story,
you're a great storyteller, so go for it.
The story helps to explain the nature of the problem.
Yeah.
A Scottish gentleman got on a train in London. He was in a compartment all to himself. The train headed for Glasgow. Several hours later, they got close to the Scottish border. The ticket collector came round and said, "Can I see your ticket, please?" And the Scottish gentleman said, "Aye, you can." And he looked and he said, "But I can't find it. I'm terribly sorry." And he said, "Well, then you must buy a ticket." He said, "I've already bought a ticket." He said, "Well, there's no evidence. So you must buy a ticket." "I'm not buying another ticket." "Okay."
You say Jimmy? Jimmy, I'm not
Jimmy, He said, "Is that your suitcase up there?" He said, "Yes." So he pulled down the window in the compartment, took the guy's suitcase and threw it out of the window. And at that stage they were going over a bridge and it landed in the river below. The Scottish guy was livid, as you can imagine. He said, "First of all, you accuse me of not paying for my ticket, and now you've tried to drown my son." Now, so in selling, the first thing is you've got to have a damn good story.
Yeah.
Now, if the story's no good, there isn't any point talking about salespeople. Yeah. So the story's got to be good. Hopefully that story is basically a good story in terms of a joke.
Yeah, I laugh.
In terms of a proposition,
yeah.
The proposition must be very dynamic.
Yeah.
Must really promise something interesting, just like a good joke does, even though a joke is only a momentary thing. Then you've got to figure out how to tell it. And as you would notice, I used in the joke a little bit of spice to come up with a Scottish accent and what have you, and, which is not easy, because as most people know, a Scottish accent is a mixture of English and alcohol.
So you were drinking before you came on the program.
Indeed, yeah. So you've got to have a very good story, and that's where most people are lacking. They don't have a good story. It's a duplication. It's not anything interesting at all to the market. They've already got what most people are selling. So therein lies the first problem, is that we are sending salespeople to a certain commercial suicide because their story is not interesting. So if you get a good story that promises better results to the market.
Okay, I was going to ask you, what represents a good story? So
serious progress.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that, Peter, is to ask yourself a simple question. Do we have a value gap in what we sell? So a value gap, if I say to people, what does a restaurant sell? The first thing they say is food. Yeah? But it can't be food, because if it was, it would be the most expensive place to buy food. Then they say service. Well, it can't be service, because if it was, we'd be going there to meet the staff, and we will meet the staff, but we're not going there to meet the staff.
No, we're not.
So what does a
Unless it's Hooters,
sell?
Maybe. Some sick people go to Hooters for that, I believe.
I don't go.
No, either way.
I don't go.
I don't go either.
I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, either way.
Okay.
But I believe people do go to it.
Okay.
In America.
Well, okay. So, so the answer then is that a restaurant sells an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
It's very simple when you think about it. So what a restaurant sells,
total experience,
and what we buy is a pleasant experience with family, with friends, with business associates. But the next question is, what do we get charged for on the way out? Food and drink. So there's a gap, a value gap, a classic value gap in our society between what a restaurant sells, a pleasant experience, versus what they charge for food and drink. You won't find any reference on the receipt to a pleasant experience.
So if the bill ends up being $200 and you're so happy, you look at that bill and say, yeah, that's great, and you give a nice tip, and that is in a sense is like a reflection of the extra value you feel as though you've got. Because
absolutely.
Yeah. Now that must be transformed to anything you're selling.
Exactly. And the news is that most companies, most organizations,
don't even think about this.
They don't have a value gap. So what they sell equals what they charge for.
Yeah.
So the plight of bookstores, for instance, at the moment, is that they sell books and charge for books. So people are buying online now.
Good point. Good point.
So they don't have a value gap. So a value gap then is the basis of a good story. The distance between what you charge for, the price, versus the pleasure that you sell. And it's critical to sell pleasure and not simply the price of an item.
And I guess that's why our last guest was talking about luxury doing very well. When you watch people going into a Louis Vuitton store, you can see it they're quite excited by the whole experience, particularly if they've actually got some money to buy something. But that is actually the whole experience is the value bit, isn't it?
It is, and you've just reminded me I must ring my wife.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Careful sexist jokes or anything.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Now,
Yeah.
so first and foremost, you have to have an interesting value gap.
Yeah.
You have to have something different between the charge versus the charisma of what you offer. When you have, okay, then you're set to go. And then the next question is, how will the salespeople manage this? How will they be taught? Will there be standards set? Etc. And it usually doesn't happen. In most organizations, most salespeople, and this is what happened to me, working for a major organization in the UK many years ago, I was left to my own devices, which was unfortunate because I didn't have any.
Yeah.
So it's not good enough. It simply isn't good enough.
So obviously there are some good companies who understand the message you're talking about.
Yes.
But obviously you get freighted into companies where they haven't been doing it, and obviously that's what you try to do. You change.
Yeah, I'm inviting them to do it properly.
Yeah.
Now, the only reason, by the way, that organizations that don't have an interesting offering and an interesting way to sell it do well is because those below them do it even worse. That's the only reason. They're propped up by people who are even worse than they are. So I was working in America in January with an organization that is from Australia, run by Australians. Very successful company, and they take all this kind of thing very seriously. Now, they're not a huge organization, but they take it very seriously.
Is that because the Americans are better at sales, or is that a myth?
They're Australians.
Yeah.
They're Australians, so
But I'm saying, because they've taken their business to America, do they feel as though they need to have good quality salespeople because the people they're competing against may well be better because Americans allegedly are better salespeople?
Well, that's a good point. I don't know whether they are or not. I still get nonsense aimed at me, such as, John, do you think the salespeople are born? I said, well, I think it helps.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
So if
and you're saying that salespeople can be created if you give them this understanding of a story, understanding what the value gap is. And look, I once interviewed, and you'd remember him, Zig Ziglar. And I interviewed an American, he's quite famous on the speaking circuit for sales. And he said that there are many customers actually like their salesperson to be like them. So if you're a fast-talking, fast-thinking person, you don't want a slow-talking salesperson. But if you're from Texas, you'd like a slow-talking person. Is that an important issue, do you think?
Well, the ability to be versatile, to be flexible is not to sell your soul and suddenly become someone you're not. But for instance, if you're selling to the high end of town, then the behavior, the manner of dress, is completely different than selling to the small end of town. This does not mean that you're patronizing, it means that you're flexible.
Yeah, and Steve Jobs got that. I don't know if you read his book by Walter Isaacson.
Has he read my book?
No, he hasn't.
Okay.
I can guarantee you he hasn't read yours. They were good books, but he missed them. But he actually made the point when he was arguing with Wozniak over a certain product that we're not selling these to our geek mates in Silicon Valley. We're selling these to real people. And he understood. And that's why we end up with iPods and iPhones and things like that. He understood the customer. And the story, of course, he always put on those fantastic launches and the whole world wanted to see them. He understood what we're like.
So I think the thing is that people need to know the potential that exists in the market is for progress. It's not for change. We're not interested in change. We're interested in having something better than we've currently got, much better, a better result. That's number one. Number two is, do we have a proposition that actually promises better results? And three, do we have salespeople who know, A, how to get the message across, and next, how to become an unpaid employee in the customer's business to actually make it all happen?
So, John, if I've got salespeople, and I do, should I sit down with them one day and say, sell to me? Impress me. And if they don't impress me, I realise I've done the wrong thing by them.
That's exactly what happens in the theatre. People, if they, for instance, vie for a singing role, dancing role, they have to go through the standard routine of showing what they can do. And if they can do it well, then maybe you can help us in our production and what have you. But we don't have this business of what happens in companies is, would you tell me why you think you should have this job? And then they come up with a sob story about not being able to sleep at night unless they get budget and all this kind of nonsense and so forth and so on. So the theatre doesn't mess around. And they don't mess around with preparation either, by the way. Their edict is, we don't train and prepare until we get it right. We train and prepare until we can't get it wrong. In the business world, it's let's rehearse on opening night. It's not exactly the same level of intensity.
That's a really good point, that a lot of people don't rehearse and rehearse and rehearse until they're absolutely brilliant and ready to show.
Indeed. And then you can relax in front of a client, because the only way to put a client at ease is to be at ease.
Exactly right. Mate, thanks for joining us on the program.
My pleasure.
Website, people want to check out your brilliant stuff?
www.johnlees.com.au. All the books are on there. I've written 11.
Okay.
And I'm not boastful, but that's 10 more than God.
Okay, right. If you want to read my thoughts each morning at the close of Wall Street, check out my website, switzer.com.au. I'm Peter Switzer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.